the hogback ridges of British Columbia, shrouded in mystery and ancient folklore. For millennia, it's been said that these wooded ridges and canyons are home to a fabled and reclusive being, the Sasquatch. It was 100 years ago in these very hills when one man was held captive by an entire family of these mythical giants.
He was picked up and packed several miles. Daylight found him in a small valley encircled by cliffs. This was home for a family of these creatures. He was able to escape after 6 days by getting them sick on a box of snuff. Now let's listen to Mr. Ostman's experience.
Albert Ostman, Swedish by birth, emigrated to Canada in the early 1900s. He found a home on the West Coast and made a living doing hard labor wherever it was needed. But in the spring of 1924, he decided it was time for a vacation. He took some time off of work and traveled north along the coastline. He'd heard tales of lost gold mines in the mountains north of Toba Inlet, and Albert hired a guide to bring him there. Along the way, he was warned of the Sasquatch, a race of hairy giants lurking in the mountains. They have hair all over their bodies, but they're not animals, the guide told him. There may not be many, but they still exist. And like a fool, the Swede laughed at the thought. He dismissed the warning completely and began a days-long hike across the hogbacks, where he made a permanent camp 1,000 feet above sea level. Over the next few days, he searched in vain for these fabled gold mines, and little did he know his efforts had attracted the attention of one very curious giant. Every morning after setting up camp, Albert noticed that his supplies were scattered across the ground. At first, he thought it was a porcupine, or a coyote, or maybe even a bear. So on the fourth night, he stashed his supplies, his knife, and his loaded rifle with him in his sleeping bag, and packed it in for the night. He woke up in a panic. He was in his sleeping bag, trapped and tangled with his rifle and knife at his feet, both well out of reach. At first, he thought something had strapped him to the side of a horse, but soon he realized he was being carried by something on 2 feet, with one of its hands clasped around the top of the bag, and moving at an impressive pace through the bush. Hours had passed, and Albert was violently ill from being so roughly handled in the bag's intense heat when he was placed gently on the ground. He spilled out of the bag into the early morning light, gasping for air as he found his footing. Standing before him were not one but 4 of the elusive creatures that would one day be commonly known as Bigfoot. The one who carried him was an adult male, entirely covered in dark hair except for his palms and face. The other one seemed to be his mate, an adult female described as over 7 feet tall, equipped with natural bangs on her forehead and heaving breasts. She communicated verbally with the male and seemed to be angry that he brought a human back to their home. While they bickered, the 2 younger creatures, a boy and a girl, both around 6 feet tall, watched Albert with curiosity from behind a bush. He was in a large basin surrounded by high cliffs. The Swede estimated that the area was around 8 acres in size. There was a single entrance to the canyon, a bottleneck about 8 feet wide. And when Albert tried to leave, the large male blocked his path with his arms out, shouting at him as if to demand a retreat. The Sasquatch didn't seem to want to harm him in any way, but he was their prisoner all the same. In his pack, there was enough food to last him a week, a can of ground coffee, 6 Winchester 30-30 shells, a dozen matches, and most important of all, 2 pounds of chewing tobacco. He would remain among the giants until he came up with a plan. With each passing day, Ostman's desperation grew. He had observed the peculiar customs of his captors, including their curious fascination with him, particularly the females of the species, whose gaze held some curiosity for sure, but also something more primal. After 6 days with the family, forced to endure sights and scenes that he wouldn't speak of for decades, he was able to trick the patriarch into eating an entire can of chewing tobacco, 2 pounds of leaf down the hatch. In an instant, the Sasquatch became ill, somersaulting backwards and bounding towards a freshwater spring in the corner of the basin. Now, the entrance was unguarded. Ostman grabbed his rifle and pack and tried to make his escape when he saw the older female barreling through the woods towards him. He fired a shot. He didn't know if he hit her, but she slowed down and allowed him to leave. Ostman made it through the basin entrance and ran downhill as far as his legs would take him. After a day and a half, he emerged from the forest at a logging camp, hungry for meat and craving nicotine. Despite all odds, he had survived the encounter, but he never told anybody what happened to him until 1958. Decades later, when Ostman met with accomplished Bigfoot researcher John Green, the Swede offered his own belief that the Sasquatch, on the verge of extinction, would kidnap humans in an effort to reproduce with them. Over the next 100 years, rumors would speak of a peculiar group of Sasquatch that roamed the hogback ridges near Toba Inlet. Those bearing dirty blonde hair with features less bestial than one would expect. Some speculate that during those 6 days in the spring of 1924, an unholy union between man and beast took place. A shameful act of intimacy that gave rise to a hybrid bloodline hidden away in the depths of the forest. Is that even possible? Is the human genome close enough to Bigfoot's that together we could produce healthy offspring? Could this raunchy encounter have traumatized this poor Swede for decades? And what really happened during those 6 days in the spring of 1924? Only time will tell. Thanks for watching. If you liked this, you're gonna love some of the other shit I have on my channel, so check it out.
Then how do you explain? It's an urban legend that never happened.